Hello, everybody, and welcome to Politics of the Empire, episode number 11. Back after, 3 or 4 weeks here off. This is finally the episode that I guess everybody has promised you. These two are giggling about something, and I'm remote, so if there's something going on here, I don't know what it is. And if they're playing some funky music in the background that I can't hear, I'm gonna kick your guys' ass next time I see it. Just kidding.
What are you talking about? Is this the Soviet national anthem? That's
yeah.
Is that
Adam's getting himself choked up. He's getting himself choked up before the show.
I figured it was going to be something like that, or like the Benny Hill theme or something like that.
No, we play the Benny Hill theme when we start talking about capitalism, but...
Hey. For another time. Anywho, I think this is going to be in the format. There's definitely one of us that falls in the farther left persuasion on this program, that being... this here. I think this is going to be kind of in the format of Adam is going to present his dissertation, and then we'll ask him to defend it afterwards. So, without further ado, we got Josh with us too. I know the camera hasn't been anybody but me. Say hi to everybody. Adam, we're ready for your opening statement.
Well, I mean, I don't want it to seem like I'm like on trial here or anything like that.
It's not. You're not on trial. We're just, this is
I got a way that might be a little easier to start it if you want.
Go ahead, Josh.
Do you have, and if you don't, it's okay. We can go in a different direction. But do you have a brief definition of how you define socialism? And I guess the follow-up, I'll give you the follow-up before we even start, is... Okay. Is there a difference between socialism and communism? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. when you're talking about socialism and communism, yes, they're both different things. They're both different terms. They're both I don't know if they're different ideologies, but they definitely go hand in hand with each other. I mean, usually in today's modern day and age, they're very synonymous. Usually when somebody's talking about socialism, they're also talking about communism and vice versa. It hasn't always been like that, and theoretically it's not like that. There is a difference between socialism and there is a difference between communism. There's a difference between types of socialism too. I think that's where the biggest difference lies, in my own opinion, because when you're talking about communism is the end goal of socialism. And socialism, there are many different aspects of socialism that can lead to communism. Different theories of socialism and philosophies of socialism that can eventually, that is eventually supposed to lead to communism. That's why, I mean, I'm more so referring to myself as an anarcho-communist. However, the basis of that is that everything should be anarchist when it comes to communism. And I'll get to that as we move on. But when it comes to communism, it's the goal. It's a classless, stateless society. With the Marx saying, to each according to their ability, to each according to their need. That is the end goal of socialism. Socialism is collective control of the means of production by the working class, and it's the emancipation of labor from capital. That is pretty much the bare bones definition of socialism. And essentially, too, what socialism is, or I'm sorry, what socialism is not, is it's not a set of government programs. That's not what socialism typically is. Socialism, like I said, it is a collective control of the means of production. Now, again, there are different forms. Socialism, too, in and of itself, is revolutionary. Again, for the very most part. Now, there are different types of socialism. There's one type of socialism that doesn't see as a revolution necessary in order to obtain socialism and to eventually obtain communism, and that's utopian socialism. It seems like everybody, whether you're talking about Lenin, whether you're talking about Mao, whether you're talking about Marx, whether you're talking about Kropotkin, has some type of problem with utopian socialism. And utopian socialism is basically socialism that will come about without revolution. They think that the bourgeoisie will go ahead and just turn over their property, turn over their capital, and form this socialist state, which isn't going to be the case. Now, the other side of that is called...
Is that linked to Fabianism?
What is Fabianism?
Maybe... I don't want to interrupt you with it, but maybe we can get to it later. It's more similar to your utopian one, I guess I would say. The Fabian Society.
It might be. I haven't looked into
Fabian Society of Great Britain.
Yeah, I haven't looked into the Fabian Society myself, but it might be. It might be. I don't know.
I'll find a time to interject.
Okay. On the other end of utopian socialism is scientific socialism, which is, in the broader sense, what most people are. Is what they think about when they think about socialism. And under scientific socialism, you have more of this branching out in terms of your type of socialism. Again, this is more revolutionary socialism. It is revolutionary socialism. And there are two types of socialism in this sense. There's libertarian socialism, which I subscribe to, and then there's authoritarian socialism. As far as libertarian socialism goes, it's destroying the state and developing a new society out of the shell of the old. Other relatable terms to this include anarcho-communism, like I mentioned before, anarcho-syndicalism, libertarian Marxism, and so on and so forth. Aside from libertarian socialism, the other end of that is authoritarian socialism, which is secure in state control because it is an inevitable aspect to deal with. If socialists don't take it, then capitalists, nationalists will. Authoritarian socialists, they don't take the state as it is, but what they will do is they will strip it down of its military, police force, and bureaucracy from there. And other relatable terms to authoritarian socialism would be Leninism, Maoism, Marxism, so on and so forth. When it comes to both of these theories and philosophies, I think that the burden of proof lies more so on the authoritarian socialism end of things, much more so than the libertarian socialism arm of things, simply because, like I said, the end goal of socialism should be communism, which is a stateless, moneyless, classless society. So if you're trying to achieve this, I mean, it would seem counterproductive and hypocritical in a sense to undertake state control in order to achieve your means. That's why, like I said, I think the burden of proof lies with the authoritarian socialists more so than the libertarian socialists. Not to mention, there are examples within history, recent history, and modern day history, which I'm talking about today, where anarcho-communism and libertarian socialism has worked, and it continues to work. And I've mentioned it on shows before. When I've mentioned revolutionary Spain, Free Ukraine are two instances in the past where, they've probably been the more successful anarcho-communist and libertarian socialist societies. And then today we have the Zapatistas within southern Mexico and the Chiapas, and then Rojava in the Middle East with the Kurds in Syria and some portions of Syria and northern Iraq. So, like I said, I think the burden of proof lies more so on the end of authoritarian socialism than it does with libertarian socialism.
What is democratic socialism?
Democratic socialism is, a lot of people are getting their fair dosage of democratic socialism, especially within the last few years with the emergence of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashidi Tlaib here, in the Metro Detroit area. Democratic socialists, I know some socialists have a problem with them. Some might refer to them as neoliberals. I don't. I definitely think that democratic socialists are true leftists in the sense that they do want to bring on change within the world, and a socialist change within the world. The biggest difference between them, the best explanation that I was able to find, and to best explain this, is that when you're talking about libertarian socialism and authoritarian socialism in regard to Leninism or Maoism or Marxism, is those undertake socialism by ways of revolution. I like to see it as democratic socialists want to undertake, change through evolution. They're the ones that are going to be more prone to inserting themselves within capitalism to try to change and reform capitalism and eventually bring on a socialist society.
Would a democratic socialist acknowledge what you were honest enough to acknowledge, that communism is the end game?
I don't know. I guess it depends on which democratic socialist that you are, that you're talking to, and what
the ones that you named.
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I haven't spoken to Bernie Sanders. I haven't spoken to AOC or Rashida Tlaib, so I don't know, and I haven't heard them talk about communism.
Hey, Adam, is Tlaib your congresswoman?
You know what? I don't know. She's not? No.
Yeah, she's very close. Very close to where we're at. It's a 25-minute drive.
Yeah.
But no.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you're in the same county that she represents, but at the same time, like half of everybody in Michigan lives in that county. So
yeah,
there's a couple people who have jurisdiction there.
Look at Dorf talking like he's like some outsider of Michigan.
Hey, yeah, I am no longer a resident. I am no a Hoosier for 5 weeks.
Anyways, I to answer that portion of the question, I don't know, Josh. Communism is such a taboo word in this country, so I don't think. I mean, if you're asking me, I don't think that was something that they would admit, just because I think that there's such a huge misunderstanding when it comes to communism and when it comes to really socialism too, in a large sense.
So when you are saying that you like socialism and like communism, are you acknowledging that this fear of it and this dislike of it isn't completely unwarranted? I mean, are you a fan of what they did in the USSR, or what they did in China, what they did in Venezuela, what they did in Cuba?
No, but I also understand too that a lot of what has happened in some of these countries. I mean, when we're talking about Venezuela, especially, and in some aspects Cuba as well, it was a direct result of having to deal with capitalism on a global stage. I mean, when we're talking about Venezuela, when we're talking about Cuba, a lot of those people have had to suffer, yes, because of because of dictatorships within their own country, but they've also had to suffer too because of the capitalistic tendencies within, these superpowers around them, namely the United States, going in putting forth these these sanctions on their economy, which is going to cripple any country that isn't on the same tier or the same level that the United States is on. I mean, of course, there's sanctions from the most powerful country in the world, in a very capitalist world, is going to cripple your economy in some sense or another. I'm not going to dismiss some of the atrocities that some of these dictators have put forth on their people, but at the same time, I don't think people in the West or people who subject themselves or live, under within a capitalist country, should look past some of the atrocities that capitalism has also caused as well.
I want to challenge you on that statement there, Adam. What is specific? Name a couple of those atrocities that you would like to attribute to capitalism, because I think that just at the same time, some of these atrocities that are associated with communism aren't necessarily the fault of communism. It just is the madman at the helm at the time. But what are some of these atrocities of capitalism that you'd attribute to capitalism? Because at the same time, if we really want to start keeping score on this, isn't the capitalist economic system the greatest uplifting drive of people out of misery and poverty in the history of ever?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think you could argue the exact opposite. You see, that's one of the biggest lies within capitalism itself, that it's a voluntary it's a voluntary economic system where people have the opportunity to bring themselves out of poverty and make their
no, that's not the argument I would make.
Okay,
why I would say it's one of the biggest or the biggest driver of economic uplifting is, I hate this analogy, rising tides raises all boats. The capitalist economic system has brought forth the societal and economic conditions that allow more and more people every day to worry less about the necessities and more about luxuries and pursuits of different happinesses.
Does it?
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of how?
The capitalist economic model had, it's the whole idea of growth of a overall economy from the macro perspective. When the pie grows, your slice may be a smaller piece of the overall pie. However, your slice is still bigger. You know what? As someone who generally identifies as a absolute capitalist here, I still will acknowledge the end state of capitalism is a monopolistic hellhole with absolute concentration of all wealth and capital, and therefore political power in the hands of a very few people, which is, just the same problem that we had with when in a sort of monarchical or feudalistic state.
Okay, well, I'm glad you could admit that, but go on.
I'm fully admitting that. However, we don't operate in reality. We don't operate in a binary where just because something has some bad elements, therefore other option good. We're not there. And,
okay, well, can't you take that same concept with socialism and communism then?
Sure.
Because we've had such binary thinking when it comes to socialism and communism, especially sitting in this country right now.
You're not wrong, because you know what? Binaries are very easy for lay people to understand, especially when it's distilled down to, a 6-minute TV segment or a 30-second sound bite. Why get into the nuance of stuff when you convince more people than not, when you can just come up with a phrase like "orange man bad," or red, I don't know, commies bad, freedom good. Like that's as simple as it, because that's all it takes. It's the lazy route. I am not fully against some of the tenets of socialism. However, because of the things I value both culturally, mostly culturally, the implementation of and the steps needed and necessary to get to the perfect on paper, socialist / communist state are just untenable to me. And therefore, capitalism is the best, is the worst system except all the others.
If I may jump in for a second.
No, Josh, go ahead.
Dorf, I actually agree with your basic statement, the idea that capitalism has brought more people out of poverty than any other system in the world, ever. I do agree with that statement. Where I am very open to what Adam is saying and want to hear about it is because you hear communists and socialists, you hear them say, when guys like me point to the USSR, guys like me point to Venezuela, the thing that non-communists, I don't want to necessarily say that capitalists and communists are always the polar opposite of one another, and that is the two sides of the coin here, because I actually don't really buy that narrative. Mm-hmm. But what they'll tell you is, well, that communism, that wasn't real communism. That wasn't how it was supposed to work. That, was done wrong. And what I like to say when people are criticizing a system of capitalism is that, to me, almost all things that can be used critically against capitalism, you can just as easily say, well, that wasn't real capitalism. Most of the problems with capitalism come from crony capitalism, come from state capitalism, come from capitalism being regulated by the government, which any regulation on capitalism makes it less capitalism. So this is an issue, and I feel like it could be the same issue, and I feel like Adam's working on making this point here. That could be the same issue as to the criticisms of communism, that everything that went wrong with it was a step taken away from communism. And I say that about capitalism, too. Everything that goes wrong with it is a step away from legitimate capitalism, because capitalism, quite frankly, is the natural state of things. People are working to make themselves better, and they are, trading labor for goods that they need. Even Karl Marx would tell you that socialism is impossible without first having capitalism. You have to have capitalism first, build up, let it fail through people stepping in and ruining the capitalism, and then enters socialism and inevitably communism.
Oh, was that Mao and not Marx?
It's definitely Marx.
I thought it was Marx.
It's definitely
Okay.
Marx. If it's Mao as well, it could be.
Yeah.
But definitely Marx.
Well, I mean,
Says that, which the first thing any true Marxist, the very first thing you would say, and many communists have said this for decades and decades now, when you talk about the USSR, is you would say it was failed from the beginning. Communism is absolutely impossible in a place that is 75% farmers.
Well, when you look at the USSR too, in and of itself, you got to take a look at the bigger picture with it than just the surface arguments and the surface appearance of it. The USSR, was obviously bred out of revolution, with the Russian imperialist, and they had to deal with a bunch of different aspects within itself. When I'm talking about World War I, I'm talking about World War II, and then eventually they're bringing themselves into the Cold War. You see, the United States has been very, very fortunate, and from that aspect of having two large oceans between them, and not really having to deal with any foreign threat when it comes to Nazi Germany. or or fascist, Italy, and so on and so forth, or Japan on Imperial Japan, on your eastern coast there. So I mean, like I said, the United States has been very, very fortunate to have their bread of capitalism and have it evolve from there. Just because they really haven't been able to, they haven't had to deal with any of the things that that countries in Europe have had to deal with. And I think you could make a good argument that World War I and World War II were huge benefits for the United States in terms of their capitalist model.
I don't think anybody will debate that with you. It's one of the huge economic benefits.
No, yeah.
You could argue that is the number one single contributing factor to the economic hegemony of the United States.
Yeah, and
for the last 75 to 100 years.
Yeah, and even while capitalist countries in Europe and communist countries in Europe were sitting there getting bombed by
the United States got to get all the spoils and the profit from the rebuilding without ever taking really any damage on the homeland.
Sure.
Other than the loss of human beings, but you know what? The ultimate reality of life is those are incredibly replaceable from a macroeconomic perspective.
Yeah. So
one of the things historically speaking that I actually believe. I'm not a socialist, I'm not a communist, but I believe that socialists and communists should use this talking point more often. And that is that when it comes to Russia, and actually this could be used by just about anybody, regardless of what your economic beliefs are or philosophical beliefs, but when it comes to Russia, Russia has been a backward and troubled nation under just about every type of system you can have. They've remained powerful at times, but they have been backward and messy as a communist country, as a socialist country, as a revolutionary country, as a peaceful country, as a monarchy, as a capitalist country, as just about every damn thing you can think of. So
if you look at how the history of how the Russian Empire was formed, I mean, it was toppled by Mongolia, and then the Mongolian Empire faded, and then they just kind of slowly conglomerated a bunch of very different people from very diverse, ethnic and religious backgrounds under one czarist rule. The economy failed, or was largely failing. I mean, just like it was everybody at that point in mid 1800s Europe, and they chose to go full. Let's go full Marx, because that was at the time, that was the one way to unify a people. Ultimately, what makes a great culture is like a unifying belief system. And how do you get such a unified or a diversified, very unique group of people that fall under the purview of the Russian Empire to unite? And that had to be under a classless, system where religion didn't matter, class doesn't matter, background doesn't matter, that everybody is truly and equally the same. And, there is no difference, whether that's through the forced abolition of religion or, the demonization of outgroups. Hell, I mean, if you just look at the Holodomor, what they did to, a largely very working class, a group of very working class farmers, because they were just slightly better than they were cast out of the proletariat, and because they were, just slightly better because they were good at farming compared to everybody else who had never really progressed beyond like hunter-gatherers or basic industrial. That's the one way that Russia, as it's now known today, kind of was able to unify behind one common set of ideals, whereas the United States, it was initially fleeing religious oppression, and then now it's turned into freedom America, fuck yeah, whatever. We could debate about what is the unifying thread of the United States. And largely most of Central and Western Europe, the unifying factor for them was, believe it or not, both religion and monarchy. The different, they're the loyalty, the different monarchs of the region, that was their unifying factor. And that's why, the smaller, I would call it lesser modern kingdoms or countries, or whatever you call it, like a Denmark or a Switzerland or something like that, who is not a big player on the economic world stage, but there's still their unifying thread is still that common like heritage and ancestry, but that was established because I don't want to call it love, because it's not love in the traditional sense, but like fear or respect or whatever or belief in the local monarch being legitimate and religious and cultural traditions, whereas like Russia and China and hell, even if you want to even go to like Cambodia, they don't have that. So what they're forced to be, the way they were forced to unify in order to take, I hate the term, that great leap forward, was to pursue a classless, religionless society that, unfortunately, the way to do that in a relatively quick fashion is purge the dissenters. And that's just kind of the reality of the situation, because you know what? They were playing a global power game, because if you aren't unified and there isn't just a huge gap in the overall power between two adversarial sides, whether it's militarily or economically, the more unified side's going to win. That's why you kind of see, what makes America great, freedom and such like that. But if you look at like a larger, wider scaled perspective, that's part of the reason that China scares the shit out of me as an American. They have forced compliance and broken the wills of anybody who's, would be able or willing to go against, the groupthink there.
Adam,
what's going to win? What's going to win? What's more efficient? The Chinese system or the American system, when they're both competing on a global economic war? In the long game, it's the Chinese system, and that scares the ever-loving shit out of me.
I don't know if that's true or not. I think you said a lot there. I think some of it was pretty valid. I don't know that. I don't know that China, under their current system, can actually sustain that kind of upward power movement without countries like the United States and Western Europe holding the reins. But that's a different show. I mean, that really is a different show.
A lot of it has to do with, we don't have the balls to pull the plug. It'll we'll kneecap ourselves, but it'll kill the Chinese economy if we're willing to do it.
We don't have the balls because we owe them too much money. But
we don't owe them too much money. Like, it's not that we owe them too much money. It's just too much of our overall economic production is tied to shit we pull out of there.
All right. Well, I think we're getting off. I think we're getting off.
Definitely off topic.
We are
definitely off topic.
Sorry.
Adam, I got 3 questions
Okay.
that I was gonna ask you very separately, but since you kind of touched on all of it in your opening things, I'm just gonna ask all 3 of them right in a row, and maybe some of them you're going to think, well, I already answered that completely, or maybe you want to kind of touch back on it or rehash it. And that is, when it comes to communism, what was done wrong before? What can be done right? And what is real communism?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm some expert on communism or socialism, because quite frankly, I'm making more of a transition from liberalism to communism.
Well, the reason we're asking you, and yes,
I know why you're asking me.
We are putting you on the spot, is because you're one of the few people I know who's brave enough, because I actually know the answer to the Bernie Sanders question, and no, there's no way in hell he's going to admit that he's going to go to communism.
Yeah.
Maybe AOC will, because she's goofy enough to do it, not because she means it or knows what the hell it means, but because she's a weirdo.
Well, I think she knows what it means, but go ahead.
As someone coming from you who just said you're not an expert on something, well, AOC sure as hell isn't an expert on it either. I'm not saying that she knows nothing or that she's a complete moron, but comparatively speaking.
I'm willing to say it. She's a complete moron.
I think she is too, for the most part, especially in her position. You know, I mean, you expect a certain level of credibility, intelligence, and knowledge in the position she's in, and she doesn't have it. But Adam, you are somebody who's brave enough to say, "Hey, I am a communist. I like communism," and you make points. Hell, you make points much better than AOC does. You make points better than Bernie Sanders does. Honestly.
Oh, thank you.
You do. I'm willing to listen to you, but most of the people
at the same time, Adam lives in the world where he can sit here and flesh out his ideas on a roughly an hour-long podcast, whereas unfortunately Bernie and AOC and any other sort of, let's call it, more left of center thought leader doesn't live in that world. They live
Bernie Sanders could have a podcast if he wanted. Anybody can have a podcast.
Yeah, okay, but Bernie Sanders largely operates in the 30-second soundbite land.
But he doesn't have to.
And it doesn't change the fact that that's what he currently does. And if he actually wanted to be like a thought leader on anything like that, yeah.
I'm pretty sure Bernie Sanders probably still has
Bernie Sanders.
I'm pretty sure Bernie Sanders still has a flip phone, too.
Yeah, I mean, but actually, Dorf, there's hour-long interviews with Bernie Sanders all over the place. Him being sound bites isn't actually his fault. It's actually the media's fault, and it's our fault, because that's what we're listening to. There's plenty out there. But
Okay,
let Adam jump to the
'cause
questions.
we're-
You want me to repeat them? Or?
Well, what did socialism do, or what did communism do wrong?
Yeah, what was done wrong before, what can be done right, and what is real communism?
Are you talking about from the standpoint of the Soviet Union?
Of any of the major countries. You did a great job of listing
Okay.
some examples of success, but they're extremely small places. They're, and their success isn't a success with longevity, which that doesn't mean it's not successful. That doesn't mean that at all. But
Josh, also to add to your point, if they stood any sort of economic threat to the powers of the world or the powers that be, they would instantly wiped off the map.
Well, that's exactly
maybe not. I mean, perhaps.
Well, that's exactly why the United States, I think, has such a big problem with socialism and communism, because it is a direct threat to their capitalistic society. Or if you want to go with with
I don't even want to
Josh,
say it's
their
a threat to
their
the
state
capitalistic society. It's their threat to their position as top dog in the world.
Okay, well. Tomato.
And I can see that, Adam, in terms of Cuba, in terms of Venezuela. But in terms of free Ukraine, one of the ones you mentioned, it ain't the United States stopping them. I mean, it's more Russia that's stopping them.
Yeah, the ironic thing about free Ukraine is that they inherently had the support of the Bolsheviks and the Red Army. In the militia of Free Ukraine, they were called the Black Army, and they were fighting the White Army, which were the imperialists, the nationalists of the surrounding territories. And like I said, they inherently had the support of the Bolsheviks, and they inherently had the support of the Red Army of the Soviet Union. Ironically, though, what ended up taking them down was the Red Army and the Bolsheviks. Which is another one of my big criticisms of authoritarian socialism, especially like in that sense, because, okay, well, you sit here and you say, and I'm talking to Vladimir Lenin in this sense, you're sitting here, you're talking about trying to achieve communism, and and what is communism? A stateless, classless, moneyless society. That was achieved. That was achieved in free Ukraine. It was achieved and it had a population of over 7 million people. Yet what did you do? You went and you destroyed it. Why? Why did something like that happen? And if you ask me, and you could go on to the philosophies and the theories behind Leninism, which the theories behind Leninism are fine, but and a lot of the problems with communism are the people that undertake the leadership roles of it. like I don't even want to bring up a guy like Stalin, because Stalin was a monster. He was a ruthless dictator, and
He wasn't a communist. It was just an avenue for power.
I
fantasy.
mean, he's almost like a Vladimir Putin, in the sense that he's going to take on whatever role thinks is going to gain him the most power.
Quite honestly, you could argue that Putin is like a academic textbook definition of a fascist.
You could, but as far as your questions go, Josh, I'm going to address it from an anarcho-communist standpoint than a libertarian or an authoritarian socialist, because when it comes to like revolutionary Spain or free Ukraine, I think you've got to ask yourself the question: were they destined to fail for the betterment of communism as a whole? And I think there could be an argument that could be made for that, because if they didn't fail, then future communists, future anarcho-communists, libertarian socialists wouldn't be able to learn from their mistakes. One thing that I think that both of those societies could have done better, and maybe this wasn't an avenue open to them just quite yet, I think they had to become more international. I think that they had to network their message better. And I think they needed to be bigger. I think they needed to be bigger to take on the fascists in Spain and the nationalists when we're talking about free Ukraine. And what happened with Russia. In early Russia, yeah. I think that those are some of the biggest downfalls of them. Was they weren't big enough, and they weren't internationalist enough.
From this point forward in the show, I think it'd be better. I mean, and I'm not saying no one is allowed to make any other points, but I think it would be better if, when we're addressing stuff to you, Adam, let's assume that we're talking about your preferred form of communism.
Okay.
You kind of defined what anarcho-communism is, and how. So when you're talking about this is your form of communism. That it doesn't mean you have to endorse everything that Free Ukraine ever did, even though you support them, or that Revolutionary Spain did, even though you support them, or the Zapatistas, or whomever. And we'll work off the assumption that you don't want to be Joseph Stalin.
No.
Either, of course.
No.
Or even Vladimir Lenin or Trotsky. Is it's okay to say that or assume that?
Well, it's a form of socialism. So
yeah, I mean, and we know that Leninism, which I think, I mean, when we studied Leninism, I think he was definitely more of a pure communist than Stalin was, for sure, because Stalin was an autocrat.
I think Stalin was an autocrat. He's an opportunist.
Sure. And we know from history that Lenin wanted his successor to be Trotsky.
Yeah, Lenin was very, very hesitant and wary of Stalin on his deathbed. Lenin was even wary about the state that was being undertaken in Soviet Russia when he was dying. So, I mean, I think if Lenin could come back and look upon what ended up being of the Soviet Union, obviously he's not going to be happy with that, but I think the immediate aftermath of his death and what happened after that, I'm sure Lenin definitely wouldn't be happy about how things transpired.
Okay. So, from that perspective that we're kind of, taking it from this angle now, is there still capitalism within communism?
Yeah, I think because when you look at, purebred communism, there is no capitalism.
Okay.
There is not.
So my kid can't have a lemonade stand, or?
Well, yes, your kid can have a lemonade stand, but with there not being any money, there wouldn't, nobody would be paying for the lemonade. They would just be making lemonade and handing out, lemonade to whoever wanted it.
Okay, so but are you at least allowed to do the job you want to do?
Yes, and that's the beauty of communism is that yes, you would be able to do the job that you want to do. Yes, there would be some jobs that needed to be undertaken to make society work, but ultimately what you're going to be able to do is have more leisure time. And that's something that I know that Peter Kropotkin talked about a lot, and he's the godfather of anarcho-communism. He talked about leisure time and the importance of leisure time, and when it comes to just the idea of work and what it is, what it means to work, and what it means to work in a communist society, an anarcho-communist society, as opposed to a capitalist society. Whereas, in a capitalist society, you do work solely to make money. You may like the job, you may hate the job. Whereas, also in a capitalist society, you could still do some work that you like, but if you don't get paid for that work, then ultimately it's not going to be considered quote-unquote work. It's going to be considered a hobby. Whereas in an anarcho-communist society, yes, there is work in order to make society run. However, there's also leisurely work as well, which would be that work that you would undertake to that you may like, and that is also going to help society function and work in the short and long terms.
Okay, so I'm a dude in this communist, society, in this communist country at this point. And, I grew up as a farmer, but, don't have enough land anymore, so I've been working in a factory. But I'm real good with cars. So am I allowed to quit my job at the factory and put up a sign outside my house or wherever, or my shop, and say, hey, I'll work on your car. I am a mechanic. I will fix cars. I know there's no money, but am I allowed to set this up and say, I will fix anybody's car for, my wife likes jewelry, and, I'll work for, old cars, or I like Italian and Mexican food, so you can cook for me. I mean, are you allowed to do that? Is a barter system viable at all? Or working for, because I know money doesn't exist, but things are still valuable. There are valuable things out there. So I'm just wondering how money can be completely done away with when people still like diamonds, or people still like something, like anything. I don't know. Whether it's
let's just call it this, Josh.
Clothes,
should you be allowed to pursue livestock, economically inefficient things? Should you be allowed in perfect communist land to pursue inefficient economic things? What defines that is up to you in this current example.
Yeah, I don't like the term economic inefficient things, because
that's kind of subjective.
I mean, when you're talking about economic inefficiency,
Josh, it can really not. If you actually want to quantify each hour of labor as a production output, us doing this podcast right now for, we haven't made a dime off this thing. Hell, I don't know how much money we're technically in the hole on direct expenses here, but this is an economically inefficient activity. But
it is, but how is working on a car an economically inefficient activity?
You see, you guys are looking at this from a capitalistic viewpoint.
Well, but I'm looking at it as I'd rather, work on cars. Am I allowed to do that?
Okay.
Am I allowed to try it and fail?
Okay.
Or
Well,
try
let me answer.
Asking, go ahead, Adam.
Let me answer Josh's question, because Josh, yes, you will be allowed to work on cars. Your wife will be allowed to make jewelry? Is that what you said?
No, I was taking that because my wife likes jewelry. That could be a mode of payment for me working on your car.
Okay, and Peter Kropotkin he touches on this. where let me just make sure that let me find where he talks about it, just so I know that I get this right. But basically what he was referring to is like if somebody likes grand pianos, and he used a piano example. If somebody liked pianos, and obviously money isn't a factor here, what that person could do is go and volunteer themselves in a carpentry collective that's specifically within a group of people that makes pianos. And what you would do is you would help out in that collective, and once you are done helping out, you would get yourself a piano. Now, what you're talking about is going and quitting certain jobs and just doing, and going and wanting to sell cars. A lot of, within anarcho-communism, there's a bunch of free association. There's a bunch of collectives that make the societies function. There's also direct democracy within all of this too. And a lot of this is going to be determined on what the people decide for themselves, how they're going to function within their own society. So whether or not you can go off and quit your job, well, that's just going to be left up to the collective as a whole, and whether or not that's something that's going to, be done or allowed to be done. I don't know. It's all going to be left up to the collective once this society is established. Go ahead, Dorf.
Okay, so say we faithfully implement the scenario you've just discussed there. What is your enforcement mechanism? Human beings are ultimately human in the end and seek easy routes to pleasure over tough routes through pain.
Do they though?
Oh, abso-fucking-lutely.
Do they? I mean, because that's one of the biggest. I know that's one of the biggest criticisms towards communism. And Kropotkin.
What is, if you can't create economic incentive, what is your incentive structure that is going to force people to participate in the dirty work of society? I'm talking, growing your food is really, really hard, grueling work.
Okay.
Working, collecting garbage is hard, grueling, backbreaking work.
Again, this is something that's going to be addressed as a whole collective.
Okay, so if you can't financially incentivize people to do this work,
okay,
ultimately only hang on.
Okay, go ahead.
Ultimately, in order to achieve this, just because, collectives will handle it all. If you can't have, what is your incentive structure that's going to encourage people to produce and participate in the dirty, ugly, backbreaking, disgusting work that's necessary to keep a modern society functioning? Well, if your answer is, at the force of imprisonment or death, we will force people on a rotating basis to do this, that's fine. Just please admit that. That's all. Because you know what? Nobody is going to be willing to be Bob the Builder or Kevin the Garbage Man if he can sit around and live the same life as, Joe the artist. I'm sorry. That's not how human beings work.
Okay, well, it is how human beings work, and there's no direct evidence that suggests that if there is a stateless, moneyless society, that people are just going to sit on their ass all day and do nothing.
There is.
No, there isn't, Dorf. Show me that evidence, because you knew we were doing this show tonight. And that is one of the biggest criticisms towards communism. You should have brought that to the table, and probably one of the reasons why you didn't bring that to the table.
Give me about.
And one of the reasons why you probably didn't bring that to the table is because there is no sufficient evidence that suggests that that's going to be the case.
You're telling me incentive structures and power dynamics of human beings through direct observation that since like the written history of
Dorf,
man,
because we've seen large populations of people successfully run an anarcho-communist society. As much as you don't want to believe
because
that,
they're
Dorf.
never under threat
As-
from
as-
anything
as
because
much-
they aren't a threat to anybody else.
Okay, well, threat has nothing.
Okay.
No, Dorf,
I
hold
get
on,
what
hold
you're
on a
saying.
second.
How do you
Hold on
get
a second,
there?
Dorf. Hold on
How
a
do you
second.
get there?
Hold on a second, Dorf. Threat has nothing to do in the sense of everyday functionality. Threat has something to do with it. That's something
That is
completely.
such a
that is
first
something.
world
That is some. That is some.
attitude
No,
in life.
because no threat. The threat has something to do with the survival as a whole, but not day-to-day functionality.
Yeah, because
and-
your
and-
incentive structure and your day-to-day reality is I get up and go to work every day despite the fact I don't want to.
Yeah, you do it because you
necessarily,
have to make
because-
money. You're forced to because you have to make money in a capitalist society.
The threat of economic ruin is a powerful motivator.
Yes,
How do you-
in a
when you
capitalist
remove that-
society.
when you remove that,
You do that through
threat,
revolutionary
Hey, guys,
means.
hey, guys.
That's the way you do it, Dorf.
Hey guys, hold on a
Okay.
second. All right,
that
we're
okay,
getting off.
But you doesn't.
Hang on,
Dorf, shut up for a second.
Let me
Okay.
take this in a different. Let me take this in a different direction, and I'm not changing the subject. I'm not breaking off from what you guys are saying. I'm just just kind of slightly throwing something into this that is relevant to both sides. Okay. We rarely talk about our day jobs on this show. I don't find it relevant to do that most times on a podcast, but today I will to some degree because I find it to be very relevant to this topic at hand. My day job, the one I've done for the last 24 years, is one of the jobs that was said by George W. Bush to be quote-unquote a job Americans won't do. Reason we need to bring in immigrants and illegal immigrants is what he was referring to at the time. That's where the Republican Party was not that long ago, folks.
Hell, you
lest
could
we
still argue
forget.
that the
Hang
majority
on,
of
Dorf.
Hold on a second.
I gotta make this point, man. I haven't even started making the point.
I'm agreeing with you, Josh.
I know you are. I know you
Okay,
are.
well, let him make the point, Dorf.
Yeah, just let me make the point. Under this capitalist society, supposedly, because I don't think, under this pseudo-capitalist society that we're living in now, I can't find anybody to work. I cannot get anybody to work on my crew, to the point where every once in a while I kind of wonder, hey, maybe George W. Bush had a point. But I can't find anybody to work, and actually, that goes for immigrants, too. Because people under this capitalist society would rather go, quite frankly, I can't afford to pay them enough. Because I do back-breaking work. Dirty, nasty work. I do roofing for a living. And yes, it involves a lot of cleaning raccoon crap out of gutters and carrying 100-pound bundles up ladders. And it's not the funnest job in the world. And under this certain society, I can't find anybody to do it because they'd rather take $1 or $2 an hour pay cut and go work at Walmart. Go, push carts around at Kroger. They'd rather flip burgers at Wendy's. And that's under a capitalist society. So my question earlier when I came up with the analogy of the guy being the mechanic, I wasn't asking, will the state still support me when I do that? Mm-hmm. I was simply saying, do I have the option? Can I do that if I want? I might fail.
Can you be a mechanic if you want?
Yeah.
The answer is yes, you can.
I mean, and I might fail. And that's what I'm going, because what I like about capitalism is that capitalism gives you the ability to fail but not be ruined. If right now I said, hey, that's just what I want to do, man. I want to just work a garage out of my garage and fix people's cars because I'm good at it and I like it. And I might fail and have to go get a job at Walmart or go get another job. Or hopefully I realize it's failing before I lose my house and lose everything. Or I might become really successful at it. Is that option there? And I guess it goes to the next question is under this communist society, is anything voluntary?
Yeah. Yes, there are voluntary aspects of it. And as far as being able to fail in a capitalist society or not enter financial ruin in a capitalist society, I would disagree with that, Josh. I think if you quit your job and wanted to take on fixing cars out of your garage, And if it wasn't successful, at least you wouldn't be in any economic ruin. In a capitalist society, I think you will absolutely be in economic ruin because of that, because of a poor financial choice that you've made for yourself. There's no telling whether or not you'd be able to, go and get a job at Walmart if you were to fail at that. It all depends on how the job market is at that time and how the economy is doing. And there's so many different variables that factor into that. I definitely think that you could enter in financial ruin if that were the case. That's why when you look at things now and the way things are within the society, the leverage, the power that bosses and as Marx would say, the bourgeoisie has over the working class. It's crazy to think that just because they don't like the way you might do something, they can fire you from your job. Like, for instance, if, say, they're not making enough money, they can fire you from your job and put you in economic ruin. Because, like I said, there's no telling whether or not you're going to be able to go and get another job where at all, or even in the sense whether or not you're going to be able to go and get a job where you make enough money to sustain yourself, day by day. In a communist society, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. So,
okay.
One of the questions that I always ask, not necessarily my personal ideology, the word I like to assign that is synonymous with evil when I'm discussing my ideology is statism. Mm-hmm. I very much oppose statism. And my main reason for doing so is the basic question is, if it's so good, why must it be compulsory? Why must we do it through threat of violence? Why must I do it because, if it's so good, shouldn't I want to do it and not do it because somebody has a gun to my head?
Josh, I think you're preaching to the choir when you're bringing up.
So my question is, is there a way to get away from this in communism?
Communism it's a stateless society. I mean, that's what it is. It's inherently a stateless society. There's a way to get around it, and I will say it's libertarian socialism. That's the way around it. It's anarcho-communism. That is the way around
Adam,
it.
I think a better way to summarize my more recent criticism is I don't know if it's an economic or more of a logical concept of the free rider problem. How do you overcome not only the free rider problem where, believe it or not, human beings are still animals. It's the lowest effort possible to achieve a positive evolutionary or positively cultural outcome, whatever you want to call it. There are, I would argue, a significant majority of people that would become free riders in this situation that wouldn't be positive net contributors to society necessary to keep the whole thing going if there isn't a economic incentive.
Okay, Dorf, I see what you're getting at here.
How do we overcome? I want to keep going on this, and you know what? I'd love, a stateless classless society sounds interesting and something that may be worth, morally pursuing, but the roads and challenges necessary to overcome to get there, and what is necessary in my mind to overcome those, is what makes a lot of this a non-starter for me.
Could I maybe paraphrase what you're saying into a quick question that I think is maybe what you're getting at?
Go ahead.
And that is, and when I use the word punishment, I don't necessarily mean a whip being cracked or locked in a cage or something like that. But how are the lazy to be punished and the hardworking to be rewarded?
Okay, it's a write-off in that sense. It's a write-off. If somebody doesn't want to perform their duty, then it's a written off. But before that, though, within this communist society, they will be given the help that they need in terms of, okay, well, are they unwilling to help because is this a medical condition? Is this a mental condition like depression that they have, because I don't know about any of you. But I've made it known that I've suffered from depression in the past, and I currently you never get rid of depression.
Right.
And depression is a debilitating, both mental and physical, I don't want to say disease, but ailment that one goes through where, like I said, you don't even want to get out of bed some days. It is the hardest thing in the world to get out of bed. They will be given that help if they want it, to see whether or not it is a physical thing, if it's a mental thing. Now that's something you're not going to get in a capitalist society.
Who will help them?
Again, mental professionals, doctors within the society will offer them that help.
But what is their incentive to offer said help?
Well, that's going to be their job within this
What's
society.
my incentive to be good at it?
What's your incentive to be good at it?
Yeah.
To
What's my incentive to be good at anything?
To make society function. That's going to be the incentive, and not have to worry about money, obtaining money, because you won't need it in this sense.
Okay.
Everything will be provided for you.
This still doesn't overcome the free rider problem. If I give
I give
10% less effort and I still get my 3 squares and my roof over my head, what's my incentive to give that 10%? I will never see any return on that investment.
You are sitting here again. You're looking at this from a capitalistic approach. That's what you're doing. You are under the impression that there's going to be massive amounts of people that aren't going to do their job. And again, that is not the case.
Well,
I'll make it.
Of my societal role has been determined by luck, chance, or otherwise. That I'm Bob the garbage man for this forever or this indeterminate amount of time. I don't really feel like picking up after other people. What's my incentive to go do that dirty work? I'm sorry, but I
all right, let me answer your question.
You're not convincing me past this.
Because I'm not going to convince you, Dorf. You are a hard-nosed capitalist, like you just admitted a little while ago. I'm not going to.
I don't even want to say I'm like a hard-nosed. I'm just looking at human behavior here. How are you going to motivate?
I'm not going
Bob
to convince
the trash
you.
man past that.
I'm not going to convince you. I'll tell you what. Another one of the motivations is being able to undertake the leisure work that you want to do after that job is done.
But I can do that now already.
No, not to the extent that you can under a capitalist society.
Why not?
Because most of the day, because when you think about it, most of your day in a capitalist society, what do? You go to work from 9 to 5. You work 8-hour, 9-hour, 10-hour days. Then what do? You go home, you may eat dinner, and you go to bed. You rest up for the next day's work, and that continues over and over and over again. The only time that you get to do anything that you want to do is maybe for a little bit on the weekend.
How does that change? How does that change, though?
Because like I said, you are going to be subjected to some areas of work that may not be as desirable as other areas of work. But again, this is something that can be remedied, whether it be a rotation. Not to mention that a lot of things too. With this extra time, Kropotkin talked about this, that a lot of this extra time could be used to come up with more solutions or other solutions. So, some of that work that doesn't want to be done by the people, they will be able to come up with those solutions to figure out a way for that work to be done without the people having to do it. That's not something that can be done now.
Hang on to that exact point. I think that's a great philosophical idea by Kropotkin there, but look at it in practice. Let's just take medical advances, for example. What is a positive, world-changing net benefit that has come out of communist medicine? What is a great leap forward?
I don't think there's
human health. I don't think come out of a communist country's medical system.
I don't think there's really.
There isn't one.
I don't really think there's such thing as communist medicine.
Okay.
I mean, is there?
It's not even. Communist medicine is probably the wrong term.
There's no such thing as capitalist medicine either.
Okay. Name me something where a medical advancement made in a society where the profit incentive has been removed for that medical
you really haven't been able to have one because you haven't had a communist society, really flourish without a capitalist country sanctioning it or trying to overthrow it.
Okay, Dorf, this is why I was trying to direct it before towards we're discussing Adam and other people's vision of this in the abstract. We've established that if Adam was here right now trying to sell how the USSR or the People's Republic of China or Cuba, would have just been great under Mao, Stalin, and the Castro family, then I would be right here with you saying, Adam, you're full of shit. Mm-hmm. But he's not. He's not. We're discussing. We're trying to move towards this, this thing that, yes, it is mythical. It is in the abstract. It hasn't happened yet. I'm not saying that your points are off. And actually, Adam, you probably do feel like you can't convince Dorf as a person because maybe he is taking a hardline stance. But one of the questions I would ask you is, because people are different. Mm-hmm. People do have different viewpoints. The United States, for many, many decades here, has functioned. I don't really care for the way it's been functioning lately. Mm-hmm. But it did function and become the most powerful nation and probably the best nation in human history with a bunch of people that thought a lot of different ways. So how is anarcho-communism going to be not just acceptable, but good? It doesn't have to be fantastic, but good or decent for a guy who does think like Dorf, a guy who's maybe kind of on the right-wing side of things, or just a guy like me, for instance, who... Yes, I fall into some of the kind of a little bit of a bunch of the categories you mentioned. Yeah, I'm a guy that suffers from a little depression myself, and has some issues with that, and has definitely felt the experience of fighting that getting out of bed thing in the morning. I'm also not lazy. I work hard, but I think the thing that defines me maybe more than anything, and this is for a lot of people, is I want to be left alone. Mm-hmm. So how can guys like me and guys like Dorf and guys like the mechanic out of his garage who I made up, how can they be okay in this system? Again, they don't have to be better than they are now. I'm just how can they fit into this system?
Well, I mean, I see where maybe more so Dorf is trying to is what you're just trying to get out of me and saying, oh, well, you're going to be put in a gulag and you're going to be and you're going to be forgotten. You're going to be forgotten about.
Man, gulags
and
Dorf, mass graves are a function of madmen gone wrong. They aren't a function of communism directly.
Okay. What I would ask you is there an aspect of this society where people, go along with it and don't necessarily like it? Is there people living in the United States that are living their lives that way?
Oh, sure. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well,
absolutely.
I think that would be the case when it comes to anarcho-communism. I mean, I don't think you're going to. You're not. I don't think you're going to appease everybody. You're certainly not going to appease everybody. If there was a revolution tomorrow, and all of a sudden anarcho-communism was the way of life, I don't think. I mean, would Dorf or yourself inherently like it? No, probably not. I guess it all depends on what you would do in that sense. Would you try to undertake a revolution of your own, or would you just go along with with life at that point?
Honestly, as a single man with no dependents, I could probably see myself not going down without a fight per se.
Okay, well,
but as soon as you introduce, the majority of people in this country have that family, that wife and children they care about. As soon as you threaten or put those other people they love and deeply care about as in jeopardy, I have a hard time seeing that the majority of people won't bend the knee and just accept living under whether it ends up being an authoritarian communist state or whatever. I think that's the reason that most things and even the bastardizations and not faithful adaptations of capitalism, that's why so many people get away with it, and you can get away with that kind of authoritarian behavior, is because, you know what? I got kids, man.
Okay,
I'm not going to stick my head up and get pounded down,
and that's
because there's other people besides me that are counting on me.
And Dorf, that's fair, and I see your point with that. But what I look, this is how I look at it. Is there going to be some people going about their everyday lives who don't like that system of government? Yes, it happens all the time. It happens in this system of government.
It happens in every system.
It happens in, if you live under a monarchy, whatever.
So unhappiness from some is an inevitability.
No, yeah. The hope is, will they end up liking it?
The majority of life is pain and suffering. The sooner the people accept that, the better everything will be.
Is the hope that they end up liking it in the long run? Yes. If they take up a violent revolution against communists and the citizens within the society, then yeah, they're going to get put down. But I can tell you one thing right now. Are they going to be put in jail for not paying their taxes? No. Are they going to be put in jail for, smoking marijuana? No. Are they going to be put in jail for
refusing to participate in the garbage collective?
No, they won't be. They won't be put in jail. Are they going to be put in jail for trying to steal food because they can't afford it, or trying to rob a store because they don't have money to live their day-to-day life?
Of course they want. It's socialism. There's any food in the stores. I'm sorry. I just had to say it once.
No, that's
a good thing.
Whatever.
I'm just kidding. I just had to say it once.
No, that's not going to happen. So I mean, to your question, yeah, there may be some people that don't like it.
Okay, so you're not claiming that this is all of a sudden going to be utopia. I respect that.
No, I mean, again, people like different things.
Adam, you threw out a term I really liked earlier, and yes, because it appeals to me. My ears pricked up a little bit when you said libertarian socialism, and you linked this with anarcho-communism. This isn't a term that I had ever heard directly before. I am, pretty active with libertarians, and there are socialist aspects in the American Libertarian Party that are creeping in to that. But for the most part, they seem to not explain it as well as you are, and they actually come across as not the brightest, I think, in a lot of ways. But that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. So the I like the word libertarian socialism better, but sometimes libertarian has the same like negative bugaboo about it as socialism or communism does, because they think it's, oh yeah, that sounds great, but it's impossible. I get that a lot as somebody that is a confessed libertarian. So the things that I kind of came up as that I was just jotting it down is, could there be such a thing as a constitutional communism or a rights-based or rights-ensured communism? I mean, can you have rights under this? Because I'm not talking about the way we abuse our Constitution now. I'm talking about what the Constitution was meant to do and what constitutions are meant to do supposedly across the world, such as the Magna Carta even, being one of these first ones that was supposed to say that, yes, power lies here, whether it's the monarchy or the collective or the government or wherever. But the citizens of this place have rights A, B, C, and X, Y, and Z, regardless of it. So, I mean, are there rights insured anywhere? Rights based? Rights insured by somebody somewhere? Who makes sure that I have freedom of speech? I guess to put it further is, under this sort of communism, is there any liberty? You use the word libertarian socialism, so I would imagine that there is. But do I have Do I have religious rights, property rights, privacy rights?
Well, yeah, it's under the basis to your rights, your way of life, and again, I'm speaking for anarcho-communists, is going to be under the banner of the fundamentals of anarchism. And anarchism is it's a free association, horizontal, non-hierarchical way of life. And you're going to, in a true anarcho-communist society, is going to develop their, if you want to call it a constitution, you can call it a constitution, is going to develop their constitution, their quote-unquote Bill of Rights, based on the platform, based on the foundations of anarchism. So, yeah, you would have rights, you would have, and they would be based on, like I said, on the fundamentals of anarchism, which is, a non-hierarchy, a horizontal, classless way of life.
Okay. One of the reasons I've been very open to this, or at least I'm trying really hard to be, very open to all of this, is that although I don't, line up with a lot of these beliefs necessarily, I've always kind of in the back of my mind been of the opinion that pretty much any ideology can work if implemented properly. Mm-hmm. I've actually read a lot of books that, usually fiction books, where this is it, but I've read a lot of books where they make good arguments for where you could have a good fascist society or a good nationalist society. And now, again, people, he said fascist. He likes Adolf Hitler. No. Fascism can't be assigned to Adolf Hitler's Nazis, just like communism can't be assigned to Stalin and the gulags. Mm-hmm. That's not what it actually is. That's an abuse of it. So, I guess that would be a question I'm not asking you, or necessarily even asking Dorf at this time, but I guess I would just be asking the people listening, can any system be good if it's implemented properly? And to me, the way a system can be good if implemented properly is to ensure that the people within the system have rights, and that most of what is done through voluntarism. Because I know that, you're not here, like you said, you're not going to convince Dorf. We're not here to convince Dorf of something, or convince me of something, or convince you of something. People are listening to this show. At least I hope they are. People are listening to this show, and we're trying to not necessarily even convince them of something, but get them thinking. Get their wheels turning, and to put them in a different direction.
I guess you know what, Josh? I think the biggest goal of tonight's show, maybe isn't to convince anyone, one way or the other. I want to get rid of that binary thought of socialism and communism, that you're either
it's not a true I mean,
that you're either free or it's Soviet Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, it's simply not the case.
Yeah, this is based on people who believe that Soviet Russia was the epitome of what Karl Marx was trying to say, and it's also coming from people that are living in a nation such as this and actually believe that they're free.
You asked the question earlier, Josh, when you were alluding to whether or not, one of the comebacks that a lot of communists, whether they're Leninists or Maoist or anarcho-communists, is that none of these countries have ever really undertaken true communism, which I think is true. Because I'll ask that person, okay, has China, have they undertaken a classless, moneyless, stateless society?
Oh, hell no.
No, absolutely not. Did Soviet Russia undertake that? No. Did Cambodia undertake that? No. Did Cuba undertake that? No. Did Venezuela undertake that? No, they haven't.
North Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, none of these.
None of these places have done that. And I'm looking more, especially at a place like China, who's had a communist ruling party forever, and they haven't done anything as far as bringing up the proletariat and putting them in charge and doing
overall
away with
it's a pretty lousy place.
Yeah, they haven't done any of that. And Russia never did any of that. I think Venezuela has made some strides in doing that in the past, especially under Hugo Chavez. But again, you bring in all of these outside variables that have, and again, I'm not saying that those have been perfect systems, not in the very least, but there are, you have to take into account some of these outside variables that come into play that end up sinking that ship.
For something to be good points, for something to be a good system for a nation to undertake, and I realize that nations, places, whatever you want to call them, are run by men and women, and men and women are inherently flawed. But for a philosophy to take place and to work, it must be ethical. It must be just. So I guess is communism morally right?
Yes. If you're asking me, yes.
I am asking you. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Elaborate or no? You don't have to. Just.
I think I've.
You think you?
Yeah. I've elaborated all night.
But... No, that's fine. That's some of these questions. I didn't know how you were going to answer the other ones before I put them down.
I could go on.
No, I know you did. And you have made those ones. I just didn't know if you wanted to jump to other things. Now, if I may, I think you've said some excellent things tonight. I think Dorf's made some really good points too. I know you don't think that Dorf's made good points, and I know Dorf doesn't think you have. But I think you guys both have, actually. I think some of the stuff you guys have said has been,
I think Dorf is going to have to go out and buy something after this show tonight.
Yeah, I'm going to go on an Amazon spending streak.
Yeah, and I'm sure Adam will never buy anything again. But here's a problem that I will point out. And it's not a problem with what you said, necessarily. But this is the biggest problem I have. Is, I look at what socialism and communism have done in the world thus far. And yes, I am now talking about the USSR and China and these places that profess to be communist. And I don't like it. Now, I'm hearing socialists of the past and present and future tell me that, well, socialism wasn't done right before. It wasn't implemented correctly before. But the issue I take with it, and now I'm shifting this is true in other nations as well, but now I'm shifting this to a perspective of American politics right now, 2019 American politics. And I'm looking at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm looking at Bernie Sanders. I'm looking at Jill Stein. I'm looking at the American Communist Party, which didn't run a candidate in 2016 because they endorsed the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. And they're only, and these are communists, professed communists. They, who are supposedly up on this stuff. Mm-hmm. They have decided, their big question right now is, are we ever going to run a candidate again, or are we simply going to stop running altogether and just join the Democratic Party, become part of the Democratic Party? I look at these people, and without discounting those that would tell me that we've done communism wrong in the past, I look at these people, AOC, Bernie, Jill Stein especially, and say, aren't these current politicians doing it the wrong way again? Because I look at them and I see what Bernie Sanders says, and quite frankly, it does sound like what Lenin said. It does sound like what Mao said. It does sound like what Castro said. And so when I say I dislike socialism or I dislike communism, I dislike that popular tripe version of it because, quite frankly, that's the one they're going for again. So until I hear, professed socialists, democratic socialists, whatever they want to call themselves, until I hear them saying some of the things that you're saying, until I hear at least something along that and not the same old, vitriol, then I'm going to remain vehemently opposed to it. And that's that. I guess that's kind of where I stand, is where is the socialist who is the real socialist?
Well, I'm not going to, like I said, I don't want to speak for Bernie or AOC or the Communist Party that decided to, just endorse the Democratic candidate, because I think that's asinine, that would be undertaken, because some of the biggest political enemies of communists, whether you are socialist, whether you are an authoritarian socialist or a libertarian socialist, are neoconservatives and neoliberals. And the Democratic Party is chock full of neoliberals, like Nancy Pelosi, like your Hillary Clinton types, and that's a huge detriment to true leftism. A lot of leftists don't even consider somebody like Nancy Pelosi or Hillary Clinton to be leftists, just because they are, so in tune with their neoliberal ways that there's no way that they could be true leftists in that sense. Again, I'm not going to speak for Bernie. I'm not going to speak for AOC. I hear a lot of the criticism towards them, and I get it in some sense. Being, somebody who identifies more as an anarcho-communist or libertarian socialist. So, like I said, I'm not going to... I guess I disagree with you in the sense that I think it's going the same way, or they're going the same way that somebody like Lenin or Castro or, Mao has gone in the past. Something that I kind of want to see... I don't kind of want to see. I want to see it more on the left, is more unification. I think that anarcho-communists and libertarian socialists can still work in some regard with a Leninist or a Maoist or a democratic socialist. Obviously, not in every aspect, but in some aspects, because the end game for all of those different facets of socialism is communism. Whether or not Bernie wants to admit it or not, whether or not AOC wants to admit it or not,
well,
that is the case.
And that's the thing is, I would be okay with that admittal, but I mean, we mentioned, and you specifically mentioned that you wouldn't be thrown in jail for not paying your taxes, or under Bernie Sanders' plan, he is absolutely trying to implement this plan through higher taxes to every single person, and that will be done at the threat of violence. It will be done at the threat of men with guns coming and putting you in handcuffs and putting you in a cage if you do not, comply.
Man, I don't know if that's.
And if you want to say, hey, the Republicans are doing that too, okay, I agree.
Well, I mean, you're talking about big government in that case, and yeah, that's what big government does. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say that's something that Bernie is advocating doing. I know you just said it. I don't know if that's something that I would. I don't know if I'd agree with your assessment on that, but if Bernie, within his own mind, AOC within her own mind, can't admit that socialism or that communism is the end game, then they're not real democratic socialists. They're not socialists. They are simply reformers. They are neoliberals that went to work alongside capitalism and just, make society run as a whole that way. So, I mean, and that's really all I can say about that. I mean, it's.
You should definitely look into the Fabian Society.
Yeah, I will.
I'm not a fan of them, but they are. I mean, Fabianism. Fabianism doesn't, by definition, mean socialism. Fabianism has been used in other terms. Fabius, I believe it is the famous general studied in military history who won wars simply by tiring out his victims. Mm-hmm. He would simply he would attack at stupid times and move his forces into positions that seemed ignorant in a way to keep his opponent on the offensive so much that they would inevitably be forced to give up and he would
resources
win. Exactly. So the Fabian Society is a socialist society that mostly there's offshoots all over the world, but mostly centered in the UK, that wants to just kind of very slowly implement socialism. And if you look at when they started and what they've accomplished, you've been very successful actually with the socialist turns that the Western world has taken. I don't know if Dorf has anything else. I think a good way to wrap up, and again, I'm not trying to wrap up, but I think a good way to wrap up would be any specific things you think some people should read? A Communist Manifesto, is that something that people should read?
Yeah, you definitely want to start off with the Communist Manifesto. Obviously, that is
1848. Yeah, Karl Marx and Engels.
That is one of the most important pieces within communism is Karl Marx's.
If you attended college in the United States of America, you probably read it already, or at least you were supposed to.
I didn't read it in college. I've actually read it twice on my own accord, though.
Yeah, it's not long too. It's only like 72 pages.
Yeah,
no, it's really not, and just like John Stuart Mill's on Liberty is that short too. One thing I would say as a critique.
Hey, go ahead. Dorf, can I just give my different reading list?
Go ahead and finish. Yeah.
You're not going to recommend Das Kapital, are you?
No.
Me?
Anybody, because if somebody can get through that book, you're a better man than I am. Because I've read a lot of it, but damn, that a page turner it is not, to quote Yoda. That is.
I think alongside Marx, I think an even more important book is The Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin.
Kropotkin. Spell that. Even if you spell it wrong, just
It starts with a K.
K.
Yeah, it starts with thanks.
Phonetic spelling starts with K.
Thanks, Dorf. I'll give it to you after the show.
Okay, so people know what we're saying because I'm having trouble. Like Kropotkin, right?
KR.
KR.
Actually, if you look in the Facebook subtitle of the video, the live stream, it's in there.
Yeah, and it'll be in all the descriptions as well. So anything really.
And what was his book called?
The Conquest of Bread. Anything really by Peter Kropotkin is going to be vital. I think. I think you should definitely read The State and Revolution by Lenin. Again, just to get because I don't want to dismiss the proletariat that within communist or Soviet Russia. I think it's certainly important to hear the struggles and the uprising with them, just because I think it's vital as a from a historical standpoint to the to communism as a whole.
That's the other thing with Marx too. For those of you who, most people know Marx as the communist guy, but
Captain Communism.
Right, but Marx was a historian, so you can't just go through and read all of Marx's work and get your fill of communism. Most of his stuff is he's got a book on French government. He's got a book on the American Civil War. He's got a lot. So you can read Marx if you want, but you're going to have to branch out. So that's why I'm glad that Adam's given some other things here.
Yeah. I would also take a look at some of the essays that Mao wrote. Just because, Mao, and I know that Dorf was bringing this up earlier about, staving off, more powerful entities within the world that it tries to overthrow communism or tries to prevent a socialist uprising. Something that Mao does within a lot of his essays is talk about guerrilla warfare and how you go about taking down a more powerful bourgeoisie. And like I said, he talks about that. He talks about, lining up a proletariat, society next to a bourgeoisie society and just basically picking it off from, the outside and the inside out. But, just go and take a look at some of the stuff by him and read up on that, and you might get a better understanding of how a smaller communist or socialist entity would be able to overtake a larger state in that sense. But you also just go and look up to some other aspects of anarcho-collectivism and anarcho-syndicalism, especially anarcho-syndicalism, because anarcho-syndicalism is a huge aspect within anarcho-communism, I think, as a whole, and one of the facets to bring on revolution when it comes to anarcho-communism. And basically, anarcho-syndicalism is undertaking revolution within your place of work. So that's it.
Very cool.
Dorf, I'm sorry.
You got anything else?
I'm gonna fully admit I haven't read Kropotkin. I have read a little bit of Marx and a little bit of Mao and a little bit of Lenin. With that being said, I will admit that those three specifically were very good at prescribing and identifying societal and economic ails of their region of the world at their specific time. I would argue that their solutions for it aren't great, both from a moral perspective and a practical perspective. Another guy that you, if honestly, if you want a more modern take on Stalinism, there's actually he's currently still alive. His name is Zedong Zizek. I believe he's Russian, speaks English.
Of course, he's Russian.
Yeah, of course, duh, right? Um, he'd be a guy I would encourage people to look into. He's got a lot of stuff on YouTube, believe it or not. So if you're more the listening type, you can get it that way too. Um, but at the same time, Adam, this isn't just a critique of you, but I still am not convinced that.
Shocker.
Hang on. That we can just hand wave away human nature in the pursuit of communism, that the power dynamics at play on a global scale and incentive structures, whether it's a you to me or more of a macro perspective, I still don't think that, unless of course you're going to rule with an iron fist or provide some sort of pleasure incentive through largely economic means, I still don't think you're going to be able to get enough people to buy in to do the shitty shit necessary to keep a society functioning. And actually, if you follow Marx to end state communism, it's actually largely a reversal to a more primitive society is the end state. And you can argue for days about whether or not that's good, great, bad, or otherwise. But because quite honestly, I can see the merits and benefits of a more basic existence from a macro and both macro and micro perspective. So,
Well,
I mean, I know realistically, your job in any sort of debate or podcast isn't necessarily to convince your partner in the debate. It's to convince everybody else. And Adam, I don't think you've brought anything to me, and in all my reading and kind of and moderate study, which I did for pleasure, not for any sort of academic purposes, of these ideals, they don't convince me that they would ever become practical without extreme authoritarianism or an absolute collapse of society. And
interesting that you do research for pleasure. I mean, it seems I know a lot of people that wouldn't do research for pleasure, but you like to do that.
I do, yeah. Anyway,
I think one of the main points
you haven't convinced me that any of the basic human nature problems can be overcome just by hand waving it.
I didn't think I would convince
no,
you.
I mean,
one second, Josh.
Go ahead.
I mean, our fundamental difference here is our viewpoint on human nature, and I don't want to get into it because we've already been at it for almost 2 hours now, but. You and I have a fundamental disagreement when it comes to what humans will undertake and human nature in and of itself. And that's fine. That's fine. I happen to think one way and you happen to think another way. Like I said, my goal of this tonight was to get rid of the binary thinking when it comes to socialism and communism.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody on this podcast had that binary thinking that it's either one or the other. But at the same time, you're not wrong in identifying a larger societal thought process that it's A or B and there is no in between.
Yeah, and that's the main thing we were trying to do tonight is just don't. I mean, whether you want to use the word binary or use any other host of adjectives to describe it, for those of you listening out there, don't just believe the basics that you hear, And when I say, and if you're going to come back with, I don't just believe the basics, I believe what my college professor told me. Oh God, that's the worst. Don't do that. Okay, just go out, do some research. Adam provided some great information tonight, and I think the biggest point that you made tonight, Adam, is the point that. Most people haven't taken the time to actually dig deep into what this is about. I certainly didn't become a communist tonight either. But as Karl Marx said, when at the end of his life he attended the first convention on socialism, is his only quote from leaving there was, "Well, I've made up my mind. I'm certainly not a Marxist." So even in Marx's own life, people had begun to misappropriate his words. So you go read the books. You read this and find out maybe what these ideologies are actually based on before you tell everyone, no, that's impossible.
Some other guys, like, not philosophers and
Sure.
theorists of the past, but even today, I know, Dorf, you mentioned one earlier, but go and take a look at some of these guys on YouTube as well. They do a much better job at explaining this stuff than I do. For instance, like a Ben Burgess, he's getting himself into back and forth. Well, not back and forth, but he's one that will criticize wholeheartedly a guy like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. But he is a socialist himself, a communist himself. Another one, go and check out the YouTube channel Non-Compete, the Serfs, Means TV, which is actually based here in Detroit.
You know what the irony of Means TV is?
What's that?
It's a paid subscription service.
Okay, that's there's no irony in that because they're living within a capitalist society.
I know, it was just a cheap jab.
One that missed too, by the way.
I know.
So go check out some of them as well. Oh, and Libertarian Socialist Rants. He's out of England. There's some other ones too that I'm missing, but those are some of the ones that I've listened to.
Okay.
Good stuff.
All right. Anything else, guys?
No.
All right, I'm going to wrap it up with one last final thought here, and then we'll go.
Oh, we got to pick next week's show too.
Oh, that's right. We do have to pick next week's show.
Which we have two.
Or is it going to be next week, or is it going to be
or a few weeks from now?
Yeah, a few weeks from now. I would, if you're going to go down, I would call it the wormhole or the dark alley of really wholeheartedly trying to convince yourself that communism is the way to go. Once you've done all your research, before you fully make up your mind, I encourage you to read one series of books. That would be by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, The Gulag Archipelago. That would be the first one, and he's got a couple other ones that are names are escaping me right now. I highly encourage anybody before you go. Let's go before you go read. Make sure that you at least give those after you've done all your other reading with your Marx, your Lenin, your et cetera, et cetera. Make sure before you're done and you've got your mind made up to read Solzhenitsyn.
Dorf is a modern day Joseph McCarthy.
Joe McCarthy? What? What does McCarthy have to do with Solzhenitsyn?
No, I'm just saying you in general.
I haven't called for you to be banished from society or rooted out from
or killed.
I haven't called for that.
Not yet.
Don't push me, bro. Anywho, anything else, guys?
Yeah, next show.
All right. All right, we're gonna go ahead and spin the wheel here.
Oh. For those who forget, what are the two topics currently up for debate?
Two topics currently up for debate is voting useless and the morality of taxation.
Okay.
Love them both.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, these are both very much Josh shows.
Is voting useless?
Okay. Looking forward to it.
Interesting too, because Lenin had an opinion on this as well, but we didn't get to it tonight. So,
is voting useless
and
or useful?
I would like to table a motion that to add it to the next, if one or the other category pick there, universal basic income. I would like to discuss that.
Are you ready for that one then? Are you ready?
I am. Okay. I am ready for that one.
Okay.
Word.
We'll put universal basic income in there as well.
Okay, but next show will be, is voting useless or useful?
Is voting
voting useless, and it's likely going to be the 25th, correct? The 18th or the 25th. So
somewhere around there, yeah.
Somewhere around there. So
stay tuned.
All right. And if that's going to wrap everything up here for us on the 11th episode of Politics of the Empire, presented by theempiremedia.com. Thanks for joining us. We're every 2 or 3 weeks on